that are interspersed and mixed in here with, into this country's structure. And so that's not really the best example to use right off the bat. But a country that is primarily of one racial type. For instance, if you go to Japan, the vast majority of residents are going to be Japanese, of Japanese descent. And so you have a high number of people of the same racial type, so a lot of the same ray qualities tend to factor in. And so you have more of a unified mind oftentimes for an entire country, as you would, let's say, in the States, where you have individualized idea. You have people coming together under the, some general themes and ideas, but you still have a great amount of individuality and free play within that larger system. And to enumerate some of the rays, it might to give a little insight. And it is important to keep in mind that whether it be a person or a country, there are different rays that we would attribute to the different factors. In particular, the two main rays at any given time, whether it be again for a country or a person, would be the ray of the soul and the ray of the personality. And in the instance of a personality ray, the U.S. is a sixth ray country, or the ray of devotion or idealism. Also, we find Russia is also a sixth ray personality country. And if we think a bit about the whole Cold War and all of that took place, you see there were the two dominant superpowers, so-called, in spite of any of the goings-on behind the scenes that led to all of these events taking place. There was an impulse, nonetheless, behind the scenes between countries that did somewhat, well, did to a large degree actually, lead them both to be these two opposing superpowers, both sixth-ray personalities, so they both were equally enamored and equally caught up in the glamour of their own ideology, their own devotion. And so you have these two, when you have these two juggernauts meeting like that, then you're going to have a clash. You're going to have a clash of ideologies because you have both camps equally adhering to their individual personalities, their individual devotions. And so with us, Russia and the United States, both being sixth-ray personality countries, their ideologies tend to clash. Now, as far as as far as the soul aspect goes, we have a second-ray soul in the United States, as a country. And we have that second-ray soul in common with Great Britain and with the country of Brazil, among others. But as far as the major countries are concerned, those would be three that you could consider that are also all second-ray soul countries. And so those countries, by virtue of that, are going to have some certain relations. And again, cities have a ray influence. And for some of the American cities, just to give you an idea, Washington, D.C. is a first-ray city. And again, first ray being the ray of will or power, we can relate that and understand why that would be. Washington, D.C. being the head of our country, being the political, the legislative center. And so this first ray of will or power is a dominating factor in that city, and that definitely ties in. Los Angeles is love, wisdom. And if you think about that city, you got so many people wanting to move out to Los Angeles to follow their hopes and dreams and aspirations, and so that does tie in. And then as far as it also has its negative aspect too. Los Angeles, the way it's built or the way it's set up, the Hollywood Hills divide Hollywood and parts of Los Angeles from the valley. And so the valley is primarily where the porn industry is, and so that's where you get your anti-love. And again, it's unique to, if you think about it, how the hills divide Hollywood proper from the valley area, and how on one side you have the anti-love, and on the other side you have a more of a love aspect, and they both exist simultaneously there. But the whole city comprising the concept of love, wisdom, or the second ray. New York is the third ray, or active intelligence, and that also ties in with our creativity, our creative aspect. And if you think about that a bit, that would make sense too, that New York is our creative, and a lot of new ideas in fashion, new ideas as far as Broadway, new ideas as far as movies and things like that. And also, you've got the United Nations there as well. As much as as much as a lot of people hate the United Nations, that also ties in with this third ray or active intelligence ray and why it would be in New York. Chicago is a sixth ray, or idealism or devotion, and that ties into the solar plexus center on the body. And if we think about that a bit, all of the gangster and the mafia activity that sprang up in the Chicago area, and that definitely would tie in with our devotions and our ideology, and in particular the solar plexus center, because it is a center that's below the diaphragm. It's one of the lower centers, one of those centers that's tied in with instinct and the lower animal nature, as opposed to one of the higher centers. And again, it is helpful to be aware that more than one ray makes up the total composition of the man, city, country, and on up. And that as evolution progresses, the ray that dominates changes. As one begins to tread the path of return to divinity, one finds that the influence of the personality ray lessens as the ray of the soul begins to be the directing indicator. A man is generally considered to be the amalgamation or blend of 5 rays. Now, to enumerate: the ray of the soul, the ray of the personality, the ray of the mind, the ray of the astral body or emotional body, and the ray of the physical body. And so these 5 rays amalgamate and blend together to form and make us and influence us to be essentially what we are. And again, certain rays, one of these rays is going to be the dominating ray. And again, we can trace those back to usually the soul or the personality as being the dominant ray. Average humanity is going to be more centered in the personality aspect. And again, those that are trying to make a path of return to divinity and have some measure of soul understanding are going to be more inclined to be influenced by their soul ray. And these will depend on the degree to which one has integrated the personality, or to what degree one has established soul contact in one's life. As one is centered, so do certain rays reign. The 7 centers or chakras also are influenced by a particular ray. So if a person is if they have an inclination to one center over the others, then the focus of the man is determined by this condition. If one is given to emotional outbursts, or if one wears their heart on the sleeve, if the whims and desires and passions rule one's thinking and rationale, then likely the person is ruled by the emotional or astral nature, and the ray for that body will take prominence, which in that instance would be the second ray of love wisdom. Now, if a man is overly analytical, if logic, reason, and thought dictate over aspiration and devotion, then the mental body and its respective ray will overshadow the man's life. Lastly, if one is strictly driven by material appetites and cravings, and the primary goal is to satiate and fill the physical body, or to seek exclusively for physical comforts, then the physical body holds sway over one's actions. Now, the ideal situation is to balance the 3, physical, emotional, and mental, into one integrated whole personality, so that the light of the soul can be harnessed as a guiding, directing force in one's life. And this is why study of who we are can be useful for ourselves, our relations with others, and also in the study of international relations, as we are more accurately able to discern and determine what rays are in manifestation at any given time, and the science behind how they interact. Much will be learned about relations and harmonics. Now, there are also 7 states of consciousness as well that are that can be broken down in accordance with 7 different planets, and I'll touch upon that in a second. There are also, again, as we spoke earlier, the 7 centers in the body, and these 7 centers are going to be the head center, the ajna center or intuitional center, the throat center, the heart center, the solar plexus center, the sacral center or the reproductive organs, and the center at the base of the spine. Now again, there are other centers But these are the primary main 7 centers, and these each also have a ray that is associated to it. Now, again, the head center of the body is a first ray influence. And again, if we think about the analogies to Washington, D.C. being a first ray city, and it being the head, so to speak, of our country, then again, we tie in this analogy to the physical body. The head center is the first ray, or the ray of will or power. The ajna center, or the intuitional center, which is the center between the eyes, is the 5th ray, is influenced by the 5th ray, or the ray of concrete science or knowledge. The 3rd center, the throat center, is influenced by the 3rd ray, which is active intelligence. And if we think about our throat center being our creative center for humanity, and it also tying in with the 3rd aspect, active intelligence, which basically ties in with humanity in general, we see another correlation between the creative aspect, of the individual, and the creative aspect of the country, in this case, that the individual would reside in. The heart center is tied in with the 2nd ray, the ray of love, wisdom, and that should be for obvious reasons. If you can make that correlation, the heart center, love, wisdom, that tends to be a good correlation. The solar plexus center, and these are starting to be the centers so-called below the diaphragm. The solar plexus center is a 6th ray center, and again, that's the center of the instinct, your gut instinct, your solar plexus. It's influenced by the 6th ray of devotion or idealism. Again, the sacral center, or the center that influences procreation and the sex organs, is a 7th ray influence, or the ray of order. And the center at the base of the spine is also 1st ray, or will or power, and that ties in. The 7th and the 1st tend to have a lot in common as far as the ray activity goes. Ray 1 and ray 7, the ray of will or power, which is ray 1, and the ray of order, which is ray 7, tend to tie in with one another. Now, one thing that I would like to discuss a bit, and this is a subject, this is part of the subject that is a little bit out there, that this is probably going to maybe not be so easy to assimilate or grasp or understand, but the human state exists on whichever globe it exists, and there are going to be 7 different globes. And again, I spoke earlier in the show of a planetary chain, and that there are 7 planets that are relevant or germane to our Earth planet, our planet Earth. Now, there are certainly other globes and orbs in proximity to the Earth, but they don't have the same sort of tie-in as these other 6 planets that are tied in with our Earth evolution. And the process, the way that it works, the way that God creates, and again, if we use the old axiom of as above, so below, that if we can look to the heavens, look to the heavens and see how God creates on a large scale, on the macrocosmic scale, then we can in turn look on the microcosmic scale, on a miniature scale in our own individual lives, and see how does man tie in with the celestial movements of the heavens. And again, how does this whole idea of as above, so below tie in? And again, all the examples of cycles of 7 and so many symbolic references to the number 7 are constant reminders to us and for us that this is the way in which God creates. God creates in cycles of 7. And so by virtue of this, we spend our time on 7 globes, and we migrate from globe to globe. Now, this isn't a migration in the sense of getting on a spaceship and flying from globe to globe. This is more of a spiritual unfoldment, to where the evolutionary impulse of the planet, once it's finished its work on any given globe, and that globe ceases, then that life influence, that life impulse goes on to the next planet in that chain, in any given chain. And again, there being 7 planets relevant or germane to any chain at any time. And for our system, we've already gone through 3 states of consciousness, the Earth condition being the 4th state of consciousness, or the 4th globe, and the 3 yet that have relevance to us upcoming would be Jupiter, Venus, and then finally Vulcan. Vulcan, again, is not has nothing to do with Star Trek or Mr. Spock, although they'd probably likely borrow the terminology from esoteric science or from some ancient writings and manuscripts. But the idea that interior to the orbit of Mercury is another planet that is largely obscured by the sun, and that planet is known as Vulcan. And science has had glimmers of it from time to time, but there has been no real substantiation by mainstream science, at any rate, as to the validity of this last planet that I'm speaking of, Vulcan. But that is part of our evolutionary impulse. When we wrap things up on this globe, Earth, that we will move on to the next globe, which in this case would be Jupiter. And we will unfold on that globe, and we will work on that globe. Now, one thing to keep in mind is each globe that we're on, we're going to have certain conditions and circumstances that are of that globe. And so the previous globes that we were on, we were like or similar to those conditions. And now on this Earth, in the Earth endeavor, on this planet, on this part of our evolutionary experience, we deal with what we know now as a physical body. But if we think about history, we can see even on this globe how much life has changed, how much the life impulse has changed. And trust me, it will change considerably more in the future as well, that we're going to still evolve. We're still, our physical being will be different by the time that we finish up work on this planet. And we will be very different than we are now. And that's just part of the evolutionary process. And again, they're with their idea that there are 7 races and 7 sub-races for any globe. That makes a total of 49, basically, with 7 major races and 7 sub-races that comprise each of the 7 races. And so we find ourselves going through these cycles on each globe, and then as that globe subsides, then the life impulse moves on to the next globe, and then we start over again. And that is a bit of a complex idea to bring in, but it does tie in with the idea of evolution according to cycles of 7. And that is something that we are a victim of, and it's part of our evolution. Now again, just to enumerate the rays, again briefly, there are 7 rays that are in manifestation at any given time. And there are going to be primary rays that are going to be more of an influence than at other times. Now, since we are moving towards the Aquarian age, which is a 7th ray influence or impulse, we're going to have a lot more people that are made up. Their composition, their constitution is more of a 7th ray nature. And it's going just to help facilitate this whole transition and change. And so we have more people now in incarnation that are 7th ray, so-called. Also, you have a very large number of 2nd ray or love wisdom personalities and souls in incarnation now, and also the 1st ray. And so those 3, the 1st, the 2nd, and 7th, you find a considerable amount of at this given time, because this is what needs to be, these are the souls that need to be in incarnation to help transition us into this Aquarian age, into this group thinking, this more of an all-inclusive ideology. And again, the 7 rays being, first, the ray of will or power, the 2nd ray, love, wisdom, the 3rd ray, active intelligence, and again, these 3 corresponding to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, respectively, of the Trinity, the 4th ray being harmony through conflict, 5th ray, concrete science or knowledge, the 6th ray, devotion or idealism, and the 7th ray of order. Now again, keeping in mind that this age that we're passing out of, the Piscean age, which is, it's waning at this time as our 7th ray influence is waxing and growing, that these old ways are kind of passing out little by little. And we'll see more and more of that as more destruction ensues to make way for the new. So all things that are old and obsolete and no longer fit our evolutionary progress are going to have to fall by the wayside. And that's, individual people may have problems with that, to where if they're in a particular racial body, if they're in a sixth-ray body, for instance, they may have trouble assimilating these changes. And so oftentimes death would be a welcome release for them to pass out of a sixth-ray body if they were just so committed and stuck in the old ways that they weren't able to make any sort of transition as far as them being that sort of a person being an incarnation at this time and having difficulty dealing with the transition and this new impulse that's coming in. And if we watch and see, if we could take the time to study, we will see at all turns on a world scale that there are many places in all areas of human endeavor, whether it be governmental, educational, monetary, and science, and psychology. You see things changing. You see, it's like a plowing up the old field and getting ready for a new harvest. It's a lot like that. And the old has to be destroyed, essentially, in order to make way for the new. And again, that's what we find happening at this time. And so people that are caught up with this old ideology, the old ways, the Piscean ways, are going to have the most difficulty assimilating this whole new incoming group ideology that is characterized by the seventh ray, or the ray of order. And so, again, these blend at any given time to make up a person, a country, a city, a planet, an individual, every level of consciousness, again, and even below the human, the subhuman, they also have their own ray influences. And so it's about 40 past the hour. Chris, if you wouldn't mind putting up the phone number, I'd like to see if anybody out there would have any comments or questions about this topic. This is a bit of an abstruse or long-headed concept. It's really not too easy to sum it up in one quick little 40-minute segment. But there's that's just a little bit of food for thought, hopefully, to kind of get you thinking, get the wheels spinning as to what these seven rays have for us as far as influence, and how we can, once we identify the rays, for instance, that our body is composed of, or that are the influences of the cities and the countries and what have you, that can help with international relations. And so hopefully we can consider that as far as being part of this study. This is if I do have a caller, so I'm going to go ahead and check with them and see what they have going on. Hello. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, Corey.
Hi, how are you?
How is the starship Esoterica?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you?
That's great. I'm doing good. Great show, by the way.
Thank you.
Really enjoying it. Hey, listen, I hate to just change the subject off for a second. I've had a question I've been meaning to ask you here for a while.
Go ahead.
About a book called the Necronomicon. Are you familiar with that?
Actually, were you the person that called once upon a time?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I apologize. I was never able to get back to you. I did make a couple of attempts. I do know the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, somewhat. I'm not really well versed in it, but what did you have? What kind of question in particular did you have about it?
Well, I guess it goes back to just the stories and the myths that it's kind of a dangerous book, that if you read it, that you might go nuts, that the guy that wrote it actually didn't get a chance to finish it because he was apparently connecting to some sort of Luciferic consciousness that he unleashed into his mind or something to that effect. Have you heard any truth behind that? Is there any danger in having the book like in my house anywhere?
Well, I think that there are definitely things that have... There's magnetism to everything, and whether there's good magnetism or bad magnetism depends. And a book like that, they have a... as far as the magnetism, though, certain things are going to have a bad magnetism, so to speak, or a better magnetism. It's kind of like the idea of consecrating something or blessing something, like a priest would do, with holy water.
Okay.
Also, I am somewhat familiar through the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, as far as the whole idea of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, that is,
yes,
they give him credit with being or H.P. Lovecraft gives him credit with being the author of the Necronomicon.
That's right.
And that it drove him mad, and that a lot of the stories are built around that very book. It's definitely very much found its way into mainstream pop culture. Also, I don't know if you're familiar with the horror movies, The Evil Dead, or The Evil Dead 2, and there were some other ones as well, but that whole premise was that they read the Necronomicon, they awoke these zombie-type creatures, and they got into a whole lot of trouble as a result. So I would say anytime that you're trying to conjure something or work with powers outside of yourself, there's a lot of caution needs to be exercised. And really, I really don't recommend that anybody kind of dibble or dabble around that sort of thing. It's like the Ouija board as well. The Ouija board may seem innocuous and simple enough, but you can really bring in some bad things. And the Necronomicon would be the same way too. It's like a gateway, so to speak, and it can be used that way. It really depends on your motive, first of all, the intensity of motive, and how a lot of those things tie in as to how successful you would be with an endeavor along those lines.
Got it.
Me personally, as far as ritual and ceremonial magic, I've never really jumped into it full-fledged too much. I'm aware of it. I know that it is a part of this whole larger science, what I choose to call esoteric science. It has its place there, but I personally am not a big fan of that sort of thing myself personally. And I would highly advise against getting into that sort of thing.
Oh, definitely.
Even if you have somebody that you consider to be a great instructor or what have you that has knowledge in these areas, I would definitely proceed with extreme caution.
Well, Corey, a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Do you have a couple more moments?
Sure. You're the only guy on the line right now, so go ahead.
Okay. It's kind of along these same lines. I guess, first of all, you brought up, of course, the whole H.P. Lovecraft. I knew that he had centered a lot of his stories around the Necronomicon and stuff like that. But are you familiar with maybe H.P. Lovecraft being a part of any sort of secret society or any of the old Brotherhood network?
No, I haven't really too much. I've always been very curious because H.P. Lovecraft is my personal favorite horror writer, and I have several books, and so I've always been fascinated by his writing, and I think he's a wonderful writer. But he himself, as far as his personal history, I know that he was kind of a reclusive person, and I know he did correspond with other writers and what have you, but as far as he himself being in any sort of society or what have you, I don't really have any evidence of that. And, generally speaking, people that are members of societies and secret so-called, societies, what have you, they don't make it a big, high-profile issue. So I would tend to think that if indeed he were, maybe not a whole lot would be written, recorded, or what have you, unless it would be within the secret kept records of said organization that he might have been a member of. But I really don't have any insight into that, to be honest with you. I couldn't totally rule it out, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised to find that out. But I really don't know for sure.
Okay, that's cool. And I definitely agree with you about the book. I actually just kind of had it. I have my own little, I guess you could say, little esoteric paranormal library that I have, and I wanted to add that to my collection, but I knew that I should probably definitely stay away with it and not mess with any of the information within the book. And I definitely agree with the whole Ouija board thing as well. It definitely can be a portal when you're getting two people that connect like that. It can open it up. Just ask
even if you use it
Ed
by
and
yourself as well, it can be even that much more dangerous.
I'm sorry?
Even if you use it by yourself, it can be that much more dangerous.
Yes. Just ask Ed and Lorraine Warren. They're not Ghostbusters, but they're demonologists. The ones that had to remove possessed dolls and other things. They have a basement apparently where they keep this stuff. I remember hearing about them back in the 80s. Ed and Lorraine Warren, it was a husband and wife, and they were demonologists or something. They took care of stuff. But there was some creepy stuff that they came across.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, there's a lot of, I'm the first to say that there are definitely still mysteries, in plain sight, and there are a lot of shady things that go on that the average person, if they had even an inkling, they would completely undermine their earth view, their sane normal view of things, would be completely turned upside down.
Oh yeah.
So that's definitely food for thought. But I do thank you for your call. Again, it's a bit of off the subject, but I know that you had been trying to get some information on that for some time. So hopefully I've answered your question at least somewhat.
Corey, I do appreciate your time, man. Continue on with the show. And once again, sorry to change the subject, but thank you for answering that.
All right, thanks. Take care. Have a nice
evening. Take it easy. Bye.
Hello, caller. Hello. Do you mind turning down your television, or?
That's me.
I'm only hearing feedback. I really can't hear you very well. Oops, well, looks like we lost you, caller. I apologize. If you want to try to call back and get back through, but we were having some sort of feedback difficulty. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Let me go ahead and continue here a bit, just to kind of flesh this idea out a little bit and kind of get back to where we were originally. As far as the idea of 7 rays, as far as these rays that comprise what we know is our existence, and how they come together to influence and make us essentially what we are. Now, again, I would like to touch again on some of the ideas as far as the aspect of the ley lines and the aspect of how does the human body correspond with a planet. Again, we have in our body, in our physical body, we have centers, so-called energy centers, and there are, again, 7 primary centers that go along the base of the spine through the top of the head, and that, again, these centers tie in with a planet, with a city, with a country, on down the line, that we all have our centers that are part of us, and that you can find a correlation. You can find a correlation between the person and the centers inside of a person and the centers inside of a planet. And again, that's why I took the time to mention earlier that an organization like NASA, for instance, just a second ago I was inferring that if some people knew to what degree this science pervaded our society behind the scenes, they would really be shocked. And NASA is a good example of that. The gentleman that made the Face on Mars popular, Richard C. Hoagland, he initially was pursuing the whole idea of, alien cover-ups and all of the secrecy behind the space program, just from a strictly scientific angle. And then as he got more into it, more in depth with it, and more behind the scenes, then he began to realize that there is a lot going on behind the scenes, and that the symbolism that NASA uses, and even as far as the days that they choose to launch their spacecraft, their space shuttles and what have you, that they use specific symbolism. And if you're aware of that, and you think about that for a minute, there's almost never been a space shuttle that's gone off initially when it was supposed to. Something always invariably comes up, and there are always the most creative excuses you could possibly think of that they throw out there as to why they weren't able to launch on time for any particular given mission. But again, my allegation would be, or my contention is that the powers that be behind the scenes, governmentally in NASA and a lot of other agencies, are very well aware of the symbolism of numbers and the symbolism of energy exchange, ley lines, energy centers, all these things. They're very familiar with this science as well. And so that they, by virtue of that, since they're aware of it, they will send their spacecraft to certain areas, certain power points, so to speak, on a globe, for instance, on Mars. If you go to Cydonia, that's where we haven't actually really, according to what we know in the mainstream, we haven't really sent any probes or craft there, but it's always been this mysterious point of contention as far as, is there any sort of real life there, or is there any proof of life, previous life there? Are these structures, seeming structures, are they man-made, or are they just anomalies? But there is quite a bit of evidence that shows that there are indeed pyramids there at Cydonia, and also that the face on Mars, so-called, is a real artificial let's see, it's an actual thing. It's an actual man-made or made by someone, not made by the wind and things like that. It is artificial, according to what some allege, and so that's something to keep in mind. Also, we have also pyramids in Egypt as well, and the word Cairo itself means Mars, and so that in mind, Cairo meaning Mars, and Cairo having pyramids, and Mars also having pyramids, there's a definite tie-in there. And that, again, is why, in my estimation, is why NASA knows, where to go when they go to a different planet. They know where to go because by virtue of the ley lines, by virtue of energy points, and knowing about the science, they're able to go to the point where there's going to be something relevant, where something can be discovered. And again, the idea of that we're going to have, at any given time, 7 races that are going to be on the globes that are populated. You're going to have 7 races. Now, there may be more than 7 races because they're always left over. They're always overlapping. And so, for instance, like the Chinese races, the Japanese race, those are from a previous time. Those are left over, and so they overlap. And they're still residual, and they overlap with our new races as we continue to evolve. And currently speaking, if you look at us as having 5 races and 5 sub-races, we've already gone through 5 races and 5 sub-races. So obviously that's to finish 7 sub-races of 7 main races. You obviously see what we have left as a remainder in this particular cycle, and then we go on to the 6th. Let's see if I have another caller, so I'm going to go ahead and take the call. Hello?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm just watching you, and I'm just very curious about this because I don't read books a lot, but I get information from other people that read stuff like this, and I was just interested in where did you get this understanding from, this insight? Like, I don't know.
Well, personally, just for me personally, a lot of it has to do with just starting at a very early age, reading the Bible, for instance, at a young age, and trying to understand more about the creative process, trying to understand, why God does what He does. Why is He mad at the Jews now, but He's going to be good to them at this time? All the things that didn't seem to make sense for me on the surface, I always wanted to get underneath that and understand the hows and the whys of that. And so that led me on through further searchings and to further books and things like that. And a lot of times it would be, just me just going into a used bookstore, for instance, and just kind of gravitating towards any particular section and just, maybe thumbing through some books and seeing if something made sense in line with what what I was curious about. And oftentimes I find that what I'm interested in, I'll be able to find some sort of a book or some sort of reference. And it kind of ties in with the whole idea from the Bible about, ask and it will be given to you, that sort of thing. If you have a true desire to have some sort of knowledge, anything, whether it's to learn how to operate a computer or any number of things, how to make music, if you have the desire enough, then you'll be able to find the means by which you can bring this knowledge in. And if you don't read, I would, you're going to be limited as far as this kind of information goes.
Yeah.
Really, you can always make the first place to start is to study yourself. Man, know thyself is the Greek saying that if you can start to understand yourself, why you think the way you do, you personally, why do I think the way I do in a certain situation? What makes me react to certain situations? Am I more of an emotional person? Am I more of a mental person? Am I more centered in my physical appetites strictly? Those are the kind of questions you can start asking yourself to kind of help give you a better, fuller understanding. And again, if you have an earnest desire to know something, I honestly feel that you will find a means by which you can be more enlightened, so to speak.
What I was just thinking when you're saying that, I was feeling like how I was listening to what you're saying, and at some point, is there a sense of unity that this will all come together, because all this division of man, woman, black, white, straight, gay, all this division that's really, to me, feels like causes a lot of pain and suffering, that we're so separate and we can't seem to join. I've always dreamed of a utopia, but I realize it's not.
And you know what? Many people have it. I will tell you this, that is part of the influence of these rays, so-called, and the incoming 7th ray does influence us in that sense. It influences us unconsciously. And so when we have aspirations and longing and desire for these kinds of things that are good and true and proper, as far as good race relations, unity, everybody having a fair shake economically, everybody having a fair opportunity. Those are all symptoms of that influence. And I would say that there are a lot of people worldwide of all nationalities all over the world that are also interested in these sort of things. We'll call or have another call, so I'm going to have to let you go, but thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You're feeding back.
Hello?
Badly. Yes. I heard quite a bit of feedback, but go ahead. Hello?
Hello?
Hi, I can barely hear you. Can you go ahead?
Yeah, I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm going to probably have to cut you off, call, because I was having too much feedback. I apologize, and I don't have much time left on the show, so I'm going to have to let you go. I do apologize. I'm sorry about that. Let's see here. Well, it looks like we are pretty much kind of wrapping it up here. I've got about a minute left to go. And so I didn't take quite as many calls as I'd like, and I was a bit afraid that this subject would kind of be a bit outside of the norm, a bit too much, so that people might not be able to understand it too much. Well, let me see if I can't get this one call quickly. Caller?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, could you just finish very, very briefly? We don't have very much time.
Oh, okay, of course. Well, I kind of had a long question, and it had to do with, like, Hoagland's Mars, etc., so I'll probably just catch your show next time.
Oh, okay. Well, what is it? Just real briefly.
Well, I have this. My question is when you were talking about NASA sending their probes to specific places on other planets,
Right.
What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, just that there are behind the scenes in NASA, there are those that know, this whole esoteric science aspect. Again, it's like the Force. It depends on your motive. The energy is the same, and it's just how you choose to use it. Your motive is going to depend. And so, by virtue of that, there are those behind the scenes in NASA that are, I don't know, I don't want to use the term evil, but they're looking out for their own interest. I've let you go, but thanks, Carl. Have a nice evening.
Okay, thank you. Bye.